inviting leading fellows to give lectures, to expose their work, and let the world know what Academy fellows are doing. That lecture series, she baptized it the Presidential Lecture Series. And last year, a speaker, or the first speaker in the series, was Professor Malik Mas. We only had one lecture last year, but this year, she's made sure that we revise the schedule, and we are now inaugurating a monthly schedule that each month will bring on one fellow from each of our 10 disciplines. Today, the speaker will be Professor Nicola Mulder from UCT. She'll be introduced by our AAS president, Liz Corsten.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. And Professor Nicola Mulder, welcome to the African Academy of Science Presidential Lecture. And then to all the fellows and staff and our Executive Director at the offices, AAS offices in Kenya, welcome. I'm going to briefly introduce Professor Mulder, but I also want to say I'm sitting actually with Professor Mulder in a meeting in Stellenbosch, and we're talking about open science, and we're working on an Open Science for Africa initiative, and I hope she will also comment a little bit about that at the end. And this is all exciting. It's exciting times, and I think the work that Professor Mulder is doing is key for the African continent. So let me introduce her briefly. Professor Mulder heads the Computational Biology Division at the University of Cape Town, and she also leads the H3A BioNet, which is a large pan-African bioinformatics network. It's constituting 27 institutions from 17 countries, and it aims to develop bioinformatics capacity to enable genomic data analysis on the continent. She's also a co-PI of a single-cell data coordinating center. And prior to joining the UCT, she worked for 9 years at the European Bioinformatics Institute in Cambridge as a team leader. At UCT, her focus and research is on genetic determinants of susceptibility to disease. And I think this is very important: microbial genetics, infectious diseases, both for the host and pathogen, and from those perspectives. Her group, very importantly, Bioinformatics Services, develops new algorithms for the analysis of complex African genetic data. She's also actively involved in training and education and curriculum development in bioinformatics and genomic data. And she's also co-chair of the International Committee on Bioinformatics Education. Professor Mulder, we're looking forward to this presentation, and I'm really proud to have you at this forum. So over to you.
Thank you very much to Liz and to the organizers. Thank you for inviting me to speak today about my work. So the title of my talk is Deriving Benefit and Impact from African Genomic Data. So I'm going to talk mostly about the health space. So let's imagine a world where everybody, no matter whether they're living in large cities or rural Africa, has access to the most accurate information to enable the best treatment for their health and well-being, or in a world where we can actually prevent diseases, that we have enough information about our individuals to actually be able to prevent diseases. Imagine a world where we have resilient crops, they're optimized for production, our biodiversity is preserved and conserved. So how do we get there? Data. Data is the new gold. So data needs to be organized in particular ways to enable us to make decisions based on this. So we need knowledge derived from data to enable benefit for health. We need this knowledge to be available for all populations, and that's including no matter where you live, basically. And we need this knowledge to be about both the healthy state and the disease states. So if we don't know enough about what makes us healthy, how do we know what perturbs the healthy state to be able to get to diseases? So we need to be able to convert data into knowledge, and this is where bioinformatics comes in. So now this is a mixed audience. I'm just going to describe what is bioinformatics. So bioinformatics is really it's a discipline that sits at the intersection of statistics, computer science, and biology, and medicine, anything life sciences. And so it brings together these different disciplines to be able to answer questions in the health space, like why do some people get sick and others don't? So why are some people predisposed to illnesses? How diseases spread and change over time? So that's tracking, for example, pandemics and the evolution of the virus to enable the design of vaccines, or how can we improve crops and protect livestock? So we're analyzing large data sets. So I work particularly with genomics, and that is your DNA. So basically every cell has your DNA or your genome, which is the code of life. It describes what is going to happen in your body and how your body is going to respond to the environment, etc. And so when we use bioinformatics, we are able to answer questions around human and animal health, monitoring diseases, tracking outbreaks, and improving agriculture. So if I look particularly at the human health space, so there are a lot of things that impact our health. So we've got obviously our own genome, which is shaped by our environment. It changes over time. Then we have an impact from the environment. So the food we eat, the temperatures we're exposed to, etc. These all can contribute to non-communicable diseases like your heart disease, cardiovascular related diseases, kidney disease, diabetes, etc. Then you have those pathogens that infect us. So we have our natural gut and a whole body microbiome, and these are all the organisms that are living, the bacteria, viruses, etc., that live naturally in your body and are supposed to be there. And then, of course, we're infected by pathogens, including viruses, bacteria, etc. So we can look at data coming from all of these different places and then interactions between them. So the host environment, the pathogen human environment in terms of the data. So when we get data from all these different sources, we get just information. So it's just a whole bunch of data points. What we really need to do is to be able to get somebody who has the right skills to be able to turn that information into knowledge and then application so that we can actually derive real health benefits from that data. If we think about bioinformatics in the African context, so Africa, we know, faces a huge burden of diseases. So this is infectious and emerging diseases. The map there shows the high burden. We've also got food insecurity, we've got climate challenges, etc. So in our 54 countries, we also have thousands of different ethnicities. So we have a very, very diverse population, a set of populations across the continent. We have the greatest genetic diversity on Earth, but we are completely underrepresented in global data. So approximately 1% of all human genomic data actually comes from Africa. It's all been generated on populations outside of the continent. We've also had the problem of the lack of basic infrastructure to use our own data. But there are a lot of opportunities. So we have opportunities to use genomic and health data to drive precision public health. That means giving you the right treatment at the right time and being able to diagnose the disease very quickly, to do disease surveillance, and then obviously in other applications as well. So we all know that Africa is one continent, and actually when I talk to my colleagues across the globe, they talk about Africa, so it's one country. I'm sure you've all experienced that. It's one continent, but it's hugely diverse in people, geography, climate, wealth, exposure to different infectious diseases. So we have a whole geography and climate and all of these other influences that we have to think about. And all of these have actually shaped our genomes. So when we're looking at African genomes, which are hugely diverse, we have very different architecture of our African genomes, and we have a lot of novelty in our African genomes that can really inform global health. So as an example, as I said, African genomes have these very different characteristics. So if you look at the diagram on the right, so if you think about that as our ancestors in Africa, we have these, our genome, as we kind of go through different generations, our genome accumulates changes. So these are called variants or mutations. So these are changes in the underlying code of life for an individual. And then in Africa, because it's been the oldest population, there's been more and more generations, so more and more time for those changes to accumulate. At some point in history, the map at the bottom is showing the out of Africa a theory where basically small group, so just a set of those of that genetic diversity, left the continent and then sort of spread around. So that means that everybody else around the world just is starting from that small pool, and therefore their genetic diversity is much more conserved, whereas everybody else who was left behind continued to accumulate these changes. So this is why we have huge genetic diversity in Africa. And the other thing is that, you know, the previous slide I was talking about those exposures that we have, these different exposures to infectious diseases, for example, these have shaped our genomes. So, for example, all the people living in the malaria belt, there have been changes that, because a change in the genome that protects you against something tends to stick. It sticks because it has some sort of evolutionary advantage. So there's a change or a mutation in the genome that protects against malaria, but it causes sickle cell disease. And this is a debilitating disease that mostly afflicts people of African ancestry, and it came about because of the exposure to malaria. Another example is there's a variant or a change in your genome that protects against trypanosomiasis, which causes sleeping sickness. So it protects against that, but at the same time, that variation actually causes predisposition to kidney disease. So you can see how we have these kind of changes that have in some way beneficial, but in other ways in the long term, they actually are harmful and cause predisposition to additional diseases, raising the amount of non-communicable diseases on the continent. We also, it's very well known that we have different drug responses. So because our genomes are different, you have different changes that affect how we might respond to drugs. So just as another example, we did a study that this was published in Nature, where we looked at some African genomes across the continent. And what you just need to see here is the orange bar is that sickle cell mutation. So that is that change that caused a protection against malaria, but it causes sickle cell disease. And you can see that it's spread across the malaria belt. And then there's the red bar, which is actually associated with sensitivity to an antiretroviral. So this is something you would use for HIV. That you can see is just down the eastern side and more predominant in Southern Africa. So the bar that's got a rectangle around it is showing that within one country, you have two different populations that have these two different sets of variants. So in Uganda, for example, one part of that population has the susceptibility to sickle cell disease. The other one has no sickle cell disease, but has a susceptibility to this increased sensitivity to this antiretroviral. So this shows that we really, when we're looking at genomic diversity, we can't just say it's within a country. We can't say it's, you know, the global north who defined our boundaries. Genetics doesn't work that way. And we have to understand the genetics of the people that might be living in different countries, and even within one country, the differences between that. So regional information, regional data is extremely important as well. But genomics, you know, given these issues, genomics still has the potential to have huge benefits for health. So it's being used around the world in precision medicine. Here we would call it precision public health, because we don't look at it at an individual level, we look at it at a population level. So a population will have a certain kind of set of characteristics in their genome, which we can then use to decide how do we diagnose diseases, what are they predisposed to, how can we improve treatment and get them the right treatment. And then, of course, from the pathogen side, it has the promise for disease surveillance. We all saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic, and generally for public health decision-making. So looking at emergence of new pathogens. But we need more data at the regional level. But the other thing is that our data is also globally relevant. So even though we're very focused on health in Africa, we need to think about the fact that everybody from the rest of the world actually was derived from African ancestry. So therefore, what happens here actually affects everybody around the world in terms of their health. So if we look at the ancient history, we had this out of Africa migration, still past history, but more recent is slavery. People were moved of African ancestry, were moved to different continents, and therefore are living and presented clinics in many different continents. And then more recently, we have this migration due to just getting new jobs or conflicts, etc. So it's estimated that about 39.5 million people have immigrated in Africa. So what this means is that we have people of African ancestry, so with African-like genomes presenting at clinics worldwide, and they require appropriate healthcare. They shouldn't be treated like the rest of the population if their genetics is going to have different ways to treat them, for example. So global health really needs insights from African data. And the other thing, of course, is that pathogens do not respect borders. Pathogens move all over the place because people move all over the place. And so we need to have this, everything that happens here is globally relevant. An example of where African genomes have informed global health. So there was a study done on African Americans, so the population was mostly of African ancestry, where they found this group that had an 88% reduction in risk for heart disease. And it turns out when they dug a bit deeper that part of the genome that encodes, that is related to what your level of LDL cholesterol is going to be, was knocked out. So there was a variation in the genome that meant that that there was less LDL cholesterol, and the side effect of that was a reduction in risk of heart disease. So when people were looking at this in other populations, for example, in Europeans who don't have this change, they thought, well, how do we kind of use this information to reduce the risk of heart disease in these Europeans? And that gene, that part of the genome that was knocked out, it turns out there's a drug against that can mimic the change that you see in African populations and reduce the risk of heart disease in Europeans. And so this is a well-known example of where studies on African populations have actually benefited global health. So we need to think about, will tomorrow's medicines work for Africa? I mean, that's all very well because that's not treating European populations using African data, but what about our own populations? We all know that, or it is reasonably well known, that there are a lot of drugs that do not work well in African populations. So they've predominantly been based on European and Asian populations. And there are a number of drugs, like warfarin is the famous example, but there are many others, antiretrovirals. Efavirenz, for example, is an antiretroviral, which in African populations, in 20% of for example, people who live in populations who live in Zimbabwe, they actually are predisposed to, they high metabolizers, and they're predisposed to neuropsychiatric side effects from this drug. And this wasn't known because people were assuming that we all had the same kinds of genomes and therefore the same kind of response. So we really need to look at this. And genomics is the kind of data that can help to inform what is the right drug to use and what is the right dosing of that. But we need to have adequate data. So genomics is very powerful. So we've seen in the COVID-19 pandemic, it was people in Stellenbosch are famous for being able to track the spread of the disease, track the appearance of new variants, and then actually use that data for vaccine design. But there have also been now on human genomic data, there are many examples in England, Australia, the US, where they're actually using genomics routinely in healthcare to get the best treatment for their individuals. If you look back at the original sequencing of the human genome, so this is where we first unraveled the code, the genetic code that we have on our bodies. It was mostly a white individual that was where this code was unraveled. But just that project alone, which gave us information about human genomes, actually led to like almost a $1 trillion economic impact. And this is for things like jobs, the downstream impacts, the downstream treatments, or the drugs that could be developed. So anything in the genomics sector, this is the paper that talked about it. So genomics is actually not just about scientists wanting to understand genomes. It's the economic impact of what are the jobs that are created? What is the impact of that knowledge? Can you get better crops? Can you get better health, etc.? So we need to think about the downstream impact of genomics. It is extremely powerful. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has also recognized the importance and the key role that genomics plays in health. They've submitted, they put out 2 reports, one on pathogen genomics and then this one on accelerating access to genomics for global health. And in here, they make a number of different recommendations under 4 different themes. So promotion of genomics through advocacy, it's still an underappreciated field. Implementation of genomic methodology, so having the right equipment to be able to generate the data and use the data. Collaboration among entities engaged in genomics, and then attention to ethical, legal, and social issues. So obviously, because your genomics it is your fingerprint. So it is identifiable. So you need to think about privacy, you need to think about ethical issues and benefit sharing. So if you use African data, how does Africa benefit from that? We need to get that benefit sharing coming back. So this paper also highlighted inequities in genomics, particularly for low and middle income countries. So the inequities come from a number of different places. So we have the data generation. So this requires, if you're doing genome sequencing, it requires quite expensive equipment and trained people who can run that equipment and maintenance of that equipment. The consumables for the sequencing cost more in Africa than they cost anywhere else in the world. And that's because of import duties and having to go via all sorts of distributors. Then once you get the data, you have to think about who's going to analyze the data. We simply do not have enough bioinformaticians or skilled data analysts to be able to get that from basic analysis to interpretation to get to the translation and the actual health benefits. And that's because all of these things require major data infrastructure. We need data transfer protocols. With our weak internet, the internet has challenges because of electricity challenges, etc. We need to adopt international data standards. We need to have places to store and securely store this data and share the data. And then we need computational infrastructure to analyze these, which with the right workflows, the right tools, and of course the people with the skills to do that. So the other challenges, and I'm just talking about problems, but I'll get to solutions soon. The genomic data is, it's about large-scale data management. There's a lot of heterogeneity in data collection. So if you sequence data, it could be on different sequencing machines because there are different companies that make these. So when you're generating genomic data, it's not immediately comparable. You have to do a bit of tweaking. It's actually very difficult to find the African data because there's so little data that's been generated so far. And that's why we're trying to promote this fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So we don't have much data, so let's make the best use of the data that we do have. Let's make it findable and let's make it really usable. Of course, with genomics, we also have to think about privacy because it's health and genomic data. So we have to enable responsible data sharing. And we've definitely got limited resources to curate and make the data available, but also to analyze and interpret the data ourselves. So in the past, we had this project, H3 Bionet. So this was a big Pan-African bioinformatics network through the H3 Africa project, which is Human Hereditary and Health in Africa. And our network was there to build the infrastructure to enable genomics research on the continent. So we had nodes in 17 different countries building infrastructure. So for example, we built standards for data collection so that when you say, I'm going to measure someone, are you going to measure their height in centimeters, in inches? How are you going to measure them? How are you going to report the date of birth? How are you going to measure their weight, etc.? Just to make sure that data collection, data is collected in a very standardized way so that when you are merging data from different countries, you understand that, oh, yes, one used centimeters, that's why it looks different to this one who used inches. We also worked on different data protocols, data transfer protocols that take into account our internet that can go down very quickly. We built an archive for African data. So we are a data coordinating center that can submit data to public repositories, and we have a local copy of that data on the continent. We built workflows. So these are workflows that are relevant to African populations, and they can be run on different computing environments and accessible to different African researchers, depending on the computing environment they want to use. And then we trained many, many, many different people. So kind of the overall outputs of this infrastructure, which was developed over about 12 years, was that we put in modest computing in multiple different countries, in 11 different African countries, specifically enabling the use of bioinformatics, so putting bioinformatics software on those. We've got data storage for a huge amount of data, and this health data as well. We built some tools and workflows to be able to analyze the data. We built some portals to be able to serve the data, and we trained over 6,000 individuals to be able to work on their data. These are just some of the products across the kind of the workflow of a genomics experiment. I don't expect you to kind of read all of these, but basically the idea is that when there's a tool that we need, we first think, is the international tool appropriate for our genomes, or do we have to build a custom version? And then we've also got data that's coming out where it goes into public databases, but then it's impossible to find because you search for Africa and it just says, this is African data. It doesn't say it comes from Uganda or it comes from Kenya. You don't have that level of granularity that's extremely important when you're looking at a particular region, and it's going to be different. You can't just say it's African data. You need to have that kind of curation on the data to better understand what that data is all about, where does it come from, and which population is it relevant to. But H3 Barnett funding actually ended in 2024, so we needed to think about what was next. So we had a lot of infrastructure was developed. We needed to leverage this. We had, obviously there were other bioinformatics initiatives happening on the continent. We wanted to expand this beyond just human health to all life sciences. It was because the data are just getting bigger and bigger. There's more and more data being generated in all different sectors, and wanting to integrate data. So you don't only look at health, you look at climate and how that impacts health, etc., images, etc. So we wanted to sort of meet this growing demand of data, and we wanted to close the gaps in the limited computing infrastructure that we had. So we formed the African Bioinformatics Institute, and this was to address these needs. So increasing the continent's capacity in bioinformatics and data science, providing critical mass in this, and enabling these researchers who are doing world-class research in bioinformatics to address African problems like pandemic preparedness, agriculture, food security, biodiversity, and genomics for health. So data is the new gold, and this is kind of explaining again why we need the African Bioinformatics Institute. So we don't want to have data that's like oil, where it gets taken off the continent, gets refined and used there. It should all be done on the continent. So in the past, we've had people taking samples of the continent, generating the data off the continent and publishing there, perhaps with an author from the African continent, though not always. Through projects like H3 Barnett and many others that have been building the capacity, we've started to build the computational infrastructure, the data infrastructure, and the human infrastructure to be able to get to a point where we can analyze our own data. But these efforts are still quite fragmented. So we've been training a lot in the academic space, so academic use of genomic and other life science data. But when we look at public health, in Africa CDC, for example, we seriously need more bioinformaticians in the National Public Health Institutes. So there's a lot of fragmentation, and we needed to bring all of that together. So we want to ensure that Africans can harness the opportunities provided by their own data so we can improve the health of their people, but also then have this global impact. So we wanted to build this sort of center of bioinformatics expertise and infrastructure on the continent so that Africans can lead research, turn local impacts into global knowledge, and then really connect and coordinate different groups across the continent so that we could have African ownership, but foster progress from the data that we have. So the aims were to do training and capacity development, support life science research, promote translation and innovation. So it's all very well to get your data to a publication, but what about the impact on the original sample providers, for example, and the people who provided their sample? Where do they get benefits? Unless you translate that scientific output into some sort of innovation or health product, then it just stops at a publication. And then we also wanted to support tools and data repositories for this African data sovereignty. And this is to enable impact across these different sectors. So the stakeholders are both the bioinformatics community, so these are bioinformaticians, data scientists, the IT people, all those who spend their day job is to do bioinformatics, they sit on the computer. Then we have enormous, probably 10 times the size of the bioinformatics community is your user group. All those life scientists, clinicians, public health staff, etc., who desperately need help with their data analysis to be able to interpret their data. So that's our bioinformatics user community. And then, of course, there's the cloud providers, the NRENs, the internet, the IT infrastructure providers, etc., and the people who should be funding this, who funders, institutions, governments, etc. So the stakeholder community is very broad, and the area of research is all of life sciences, from understanding snakes to understanding pathogens to understanding humans, and all technologies that generate life science data. So we've decided to build this Pan-African Bioinformatics Network. So we've appointed 29 group leaders. The names haven't been announced yet. We're about to appoint a few more associate group leaders. So these would be bioinformaticians who have groups across the continent, and then the institution that they work for becomes an ABI site. So basically having these pockets of bioinformatics excellence across the continent led by a group leader or an associate group leader. And the institute, so it's a virtual institute connected through a hub, and between the sites, the hub, or the network as a whole is going to be undertaking research, training, and services. So each of these group leaders do their own research in big data-driven science, in the life sciences. We definitely need training. There's an urgent need for more capacity development in data curation and data analytical skills, but then we also need to provide services. So we want to be inclusive, so we have ABI sites, but then we also want to lift as we rise. So although we have centers of excellence, there'll be many groups. We've already identified many groups who want to start bioinformatics from scratch. So we want to lift them up and get them to the point where we have 54 countries covered in terms of bioinformatics. We're also trying to get those communities, so the bioinformatics users, involved through communities of practice, where they can get involved in kind of cross-talk with the actual bioinformaticians, so to get those two communities together. So about the current communities of practice, we've got one in AI, psychiatry, neuroinformatics, pathogen surveillance, human genomics, and specifically in rare diseases. So this is where we put with the bioinformaticians, with the people who need them, and let them talk and generate projects and ideas for what the ABI actually needs to address. We also need to support big data projects. So the Africa CDC has got some new strategies on human and pathogen genomics. We need to be able to support that if they need it. Different data platforms. There's some big projects across the continent, the Deltas programs, the big genomics projects. There are a number of national human genome projects that are coming on board, where countries are deciding to sequence their own genomes and get more information that can inform health in their countries. So we're working with all of those different kind of big data-driven projects, but we're also working internationally. We know we need to be internationally relevant. The international standards, Global Alliance for Genomics and Health for human data, and Public Health Alliance for Genomic Epidemiology for pathogen data. We want to build platforms for support, so we need to have different kinds of services. So just somebody to help you analyze your data, or build African data resources. So these are your data repositories, provide bioinformatics tools, but also build this data and compute infrastructure, because everybody says, okay, I've now sequenced 1,000 genomes, but where can I analyze them? I don't have a computing cluster that can do this. So we need to provide this access. So we're going to be developing 4 different platforms: data, tools, compute, and training. And these should cover all the major aspects of big data projects. So within a data project, for example, if you do a human genomics project, you need some sort of access to reference genomes, so that you can, there's a process where you need to have reference genomes to be able to understand your own genomes. Then we want to have metadata platforms that describe what is the data, what is in this data set, how many files are there, what is in the files, is it collecting weight, height, age, etc. What kind of information is in the project. The workflows to analyze the data, platforms to bring the researchers together with their data and their tools, and then the computing facilities to actually run the analysis. And the idea here is that we want to be able to promote African ownership, still promoting open science, but from within Africa, so that the data doesn't go outside and then gets shared. It's shared from within, and we have this African sovereignty. These are some of the platforms. So Africa CDC is working on the Sagari platform for pathogen genomics data. We've developed some platforms for sharing human genomic related data, where you can understand variants in your genome, changes in your genome, and how they are impacted by health, how they impact your health. And this is specifically the African data at a granular country level. We're also expecting a number of projects coming up, where we're expecting thousands of African genomes to be sequenced in the coming years. This is big data. We're talking petabytes of data that we need to be able to manage and analyze. We're also looking at future hosting of or mirroring of local international databases. So European Genome Phenome Archive, International Nucleotide Sequence Database Collaboration. These are all major and well-known in the life sciences public databases, and they're all served from outside of the continent. So they're based in Europe or the US. And these organizations have recognized that people from Africa don't want to submit the data because they feel like they're losing that control over the data. So they are coming to us and saying, do you want to copy a local EGA, a local nucleotide sequence database, where you can serve your own data? It's still available to everybody, but you take ownership, you take control of this. So this is promoting this African sovereignty, but enabling this global access, this open access, where it's allowed. So moving to AI, of course, you can't do a data-related talk without talking about AI. So we know that that this is transforming healthcare, particularly in other countries, and we need to catch up. So we need to close that inequity, that gap between us and the global north in terms of access to health solutions from our data. So some examples of how AI has been helping for health. So polygenic risk scores, basically it's use your genome, and we know which parts of your genome are related to potential susceptibility to diseases. And you build basically an algorithm or calculation that says, okay, based on your genome, you have this chance of getting cardiovascular related diseases later in life. These have all been calculated based on European genomes. So we need to get more African data so we can get more informed about what does your genome mean in terms of your risk of diseases. Treatment responses, drug target identification, etc. I've already talked about how we have different responses to drugs, and clinical support, decision support systems. So when you go to the pathologist now and you have an image of so you have a biopsy, for example, the pathologists are now using AI to identify cancers. Again, we need more locally relevant data for those to be really accurate, that can then apply to African populations. So AI is only good as good as its training data. And currently, if you're looking at genomics, use of genomics in AI, it's being trained to really serve 10% of the world's populations. 90% is missing. How do we make the data more AI ready? So if we think about African data, we need to have bigger data sets. We need more data from more different regions. So the data sets need to cover these different relevant populations. We need context information. So if there's an environmental impact that could have impacted the decision you're going to make in health, that contextual information needs to be there. And we need detailed health information. Phenotype is like your health. It's an observation about your health. Do you have a sore head? Do you have inflammation somewhere? Do you have a high blood pressure, etc.? Those are all very different for different populations. We need all of that data to be able to make health-related decisions using AI and genomics. For this, you need to do quite a lot of preparation of the data, transformation, linking to different sites. So if you have your genome sequenced and then somebody measures your height and your weight and your blood pressure, we need to have linkages between those to know that one is linked to the other. And then we need access to the data. But most importantly, because this is private health data, we need good data governance and data provenance. And we need to know that you get responsible, secure access to this health data. At the moment, as I've said many times, we do not have enough data that's relevant to Africa. So how can Africa really participate equitably in the genomics revolution, but also the AI revolution? So the challenges, as I said, limited data for many populations. So if we look at how AI is being used, the risk score, how you calculate risk for cardiovascular disease, it's 4.5-fold less applicable to our populations. Warfarin is a well-known blood thinning drug. The algorithms that they use to determine the dose, 20 to 30% less accurate in our populations. Skin cancer detection, the use of AI and images for skin lesions have all been done for light skin, 50% lower accuracy in darker skin tones. Generally, if you look at all different data sources, between 0.5 and 3% representation of Africa in those resources, global resources. That is just not acceptable, given that we have 17% of the global population and, of course, 22% of the global health burden. So it's just this huge inequity in being able to use the data and find the data. Africans have been involved in less than 5% of cancer studies, less than 2% of cardiovascular disease studies. And yet the African populations are the most genetically diverse on Earth. so much to gain from them, but not enough data. Of course, we also have the inequities in that we don't have the data infrastructure in many cases, curation skills, etc. So it's all of these data-related things that we've been trying to build in X-ray Bionic. They're still on a global, on a continental-wide scale, we're still majorly limited in this data infrastructure to enable us to equitably participate in these genomics and AI revolutions. So one of the projects that I've been involved in, it's a consulting that's been going for 4 years now, is DSI Africa. It's Harnessing Data Science for Health and Discovery Innovation in Africa. It's funded by the National Institutes of Health. And this has been to say, how do we use the data that does exist in Africa, pull it together, many different data types, from health to genomics to climate to images, all sorts of mobility data, etc. How do we bring all that together, use data science techniques like AI, and get some health benefits, so get some sort of derive some health products. So there are a number of different projects that have been funded across the continent, and they're using very, very different data types. So what we've had to do is we've built an open data science platform, we call it Alwazi, that enables you to bring these different data types together and find the data. So we've got a catalog, have a set of tools that you want to run on the data, run them on different computing environments, and then bring them into a nice web interface where you can collaborate and share the results. So this is the platform that we've been trying to develop. What we do for the data is, one of the biggest things about access to data is finding it in the first place. So what we've tried to do is build a data harmonization tool so that you can, not the data itself, but the metadata. So the metadata is simply saying, okay, I've got a genomics experiment. It's got genomic data. It's got the following variables in the health data, etc. So it's just describing the data set. So we've got a tool to be able to input this to harmonize this and map it to standards, input it into a REDCap form, it's just an online survey, and then upload it into a catalog. So if you come into this catalog, you can now search the different data sets in this consortium and beyond. So you can see that there's a particular project. It covers multiple different data types: air quality, climate, environmental, demographic data, etc. This particular project covers multiple different countries in Africa, and this is a link to actually go find the data and get the data. We also have the information about what you're allowed to use the data for. So this is like the access requirements. And this is about finding data sets. But now what if your data set, say you want to search across all those countries in that first project, but all the data sets can't move. So with the new data protection laws, data sets are not necessarily, especially health data sets, are more and more restricted in being able to actually move across borders. So how do we deal with that when we need to do an analysis across all of those data sets? So what we're doing is trying to implement something called data visiting, where in the past, you would have a data set. When you got access to it, you download it, and then you put it on your computer and you analyze it. If you can't download it, then the data set sits in the country under lock and key, secure, and you just send your tool to the data. So you never see the data, only your tool sees the data, and they only take the results back. So it's a way of safeguarding the data and just visiting the data. So you still can access it, but you don't have to see it and download it and then make multiple different copies of the data. So you can do this, what they call in this example, it's the personal health train. So if you think about a train, this is your algorithm, it's moving on to different stations. You can't get off the station, but you can go, send your tool to into that hospital, get the results back, move along to the next station, do your analysis and bring the results back. So it's a way of visiting, and we would call this as federated data visiting. So we've actually, through the Alwazi platform, is built up a system. We've done a pilot test in Mali, Uganda, and South Africa, where we could run an analysis where the data sets don't move. And we're starting to expand this now to federated AI, federated, all sorts of different kinds of federated analysis with a nice web interface on top of that. And through this, we're helping to sort of set up these, what they call trusted research environments. Actually, they should be secure research environments, because we don't know if they're trusted yet or not, where you have these safe havens of data in different places that if you are authorized, you can go and access, but only your tool can access it. And then you just bring the results back. And this is a way to increase open science where you really are not allowed to share the data. It's private health data. Nobody should see it, but you can just get some sort of summary results out of that. So this is just how it works. I'm not going to go into the details, but the African Bioinformatics Institute is going to be supporting a rollout of these for a Pan-African cohorts, consortium. So getting back to the ABI, just to finish off, we hope that by implementing all of these different aims, that we're going to enable precision medicine, disease surveillance, public health decision making, etc., so that we can really expand what we can do on the continent, build the skills. We want to have this, doing research, training, and services. We're literally just setting up the sites at the moment. We want to connect stakeholders, but we really need to engage government. So even though right now we've got external funding, this should be coming from the top down. The government should be supporting and safeguarding their own data and enabling their own people to analyze the data so that we get African solutions for the African data. There's still some gaps. So, when we're thinking about how we can implement genomics for health, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough phenotype data, we don't have enough linkages to other data. Electronic health records are very different across the continent. They're not interoperable. We need to strengthen health systems. We still need this government buy-in, and we need to build a genomics workforce so that we can really implement One Health. And then finally, beyond human health, so I've talked very much about human health because those are the areas we're focusing on, but the ABI, the African Bioinformatics Institute, is going beyond that. We need to think about additional applications like food security, biodiversity, and conserving all our fantastic diverse wildlife and fauna. We've already run a hackathon for the agricultural community to build tools for agricultural genomics. We're organizing another one coming up. So we really need to kind of address all of these different areas. So in conclusion, big data projects, especially in the life sciences, require robust data and computing infrastructure to enable us to turn this data which is information, into knowledge and impact. ABI is hopefully going to be able to do this, to deal with this big heterogeneous data and build the human capacity that's required to work on this. We need the data infrastructure. We need it to be cognizant of data privacy and data protection laws and any legislation, all these new frameworks, but at the same time, recognizing open science. Open science is where you get impact. If you keep just your little data set with you, it's never going to have global impact. We really need open science, but we need to do that in a responsible way and safeguarding Africans' kind of data sovereignty as well. So we've implemented some pilots for this, and we hope that ABI is going to leverage all of this and help us to really provide a data infrastructure for life sciences. So we want to facilitate and promote African ownership and leadership, and we can do this by empowering Africans to derive benefit and impact from their own rich diversity, but openly with a global impact in mind. With that, I'd just like to acknowledge all our funders from the different projects. We're hosting a biocuration conference in Cape Town in April, which is the first time ever on the African continent. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Professor Mulder. What an insightful talk. This is just where some of us want to be, at the intersection of mathematical sciences, biological sciences, and all the other sciences that make our life worth it. So thank you very much for that talk. Let me defer first to President Colston and my ED, Professor Catherine Gila, if they have any comments or questions, after which we'll take questions from our audience. We have about 79, 80 people online. Phenomenal. Professor Colston, would you have any comments before we proceed to other questions?
I would like to just say thank you very much for this absolutely important presentation. And I just want to say that at the moment we are discussing open science platforms for Africa, and I'm very glad at the end you also highlighted the importance of within the One Health context, including agriculture and many other disciplines. So this is a good example of where we can unlock funding, and if we work together for the common good of the continent, we can achieve so much. So I really would like to encourage all fellows to fully support ABI. And we hope to see this grow and to strengthen the African continent. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Prof. Mulder, I really appreciate it a lot. And it's been instrumental for us in growing open science in the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Corsten. I'm not sure that was a question, but thank you for your remarks. Professor Ngila, I see your hand is up.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, hosting this series of presidential lectures. Very grateful to Professor Nicola for that very insightful presentation. A lot of information that is of a lot of interest, like you have just said, to the continent. My biggest problem has always been our governments in Africa, and I think it's just not the governments, but also institutions. We in Africa are very poor in keeping data, and we know that artificial intelligence relies on data. If you are to advise the African Union so that they can be able to impulse on the member states, Prof, what would you tell the African Union? What message would you give them with regards to the importance of data, more so given that data is the decision maker? If we had this data, in fact, during COVID, the kind of panic Africa had, because we couldn't afford to have the vaccine just like the Western countries and all that. Given this background, what kind of advice would you give to African Union so that it can cascade to the member state? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we've had this discussion as to how to convince the governments and the African Union, and it's really getting them, what is the end point? It's no point saying, oh, we can generate genomic data and we can do this with it. What we need to say is, what is the end point? What is the impact? So if we didn't have Siri and CRISPR in South Africa looking at the new variants that were coming out during COVID, what would the impact have been? We would have lost, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to design vaccines. We would have not known, what is going on with the spread of the disease. We need to think about so numbers. The African Union and the governments, they recognize numbers. So it's not about what is it going to cost you, it's what is it going to save you. How much is it going to save you to give the right medicine at the right time, rather than those trial and error of giving the wrong meds and then having to do more treatments, etc. So I think what we're trying to do is put it into numbers, and that's like economic impact, but humanity impact. So tell them about people. You need to bring in that people aspect. So when we did a session for the United Nations General Assembly, and we had the first treated sickle cell patient. She had the room in tears. So you need to bring in that human aspect. It's not just about science. It's about what is the end point. There's economic endpoint, economic impact, and there's health impact, and there's impact on real people. So it's really kind of pushing that side of things. We've got a lot of use cases that we can, put together and try to convince them. But I think the other thing is not to lose the data to the outside world and say, okay, somebody else is going to take the data and make these discoveries. It's having that African ownership. And if we don't have the resources to curate, store, and analyze the data, we're going to lose that African ownership. So they need to take responsibility for that. It's their data, it's their gold, it's their oil.
You're done, Professor Ngila? Okay. Yes, we have a question online, if I may take one or two that have been posted online here. One is from Professor Bayer from Oakland University in Michigan in the US. And here's his comment here. In regards to capacity development, knowledge base in Africa is huge. In addition to using the knowledge base on the continent, do you collaborate with African diaspora to address some of these challenges? That's one, diaspora involvement interface. And then two, how do you navigate the governmental bottlenecks? I guess you just touched on that recently. How do you navigate the governmental bottlenecks like funding, bureaucracy, etc., in building infrastructure and perhaps accessing data safely? So diaspora and government interface. Prof Mulder?
Yeah, so on the diaspora, we actually have a huge following in the diaspora. And when we started the African Bioinformatics Institute, it was actually the diaspora. They were all coming in saying, how can I help? How can I get involved? So I've been involved in a lot of international networks, and there we've met, a lot of the diaspora, and they're bringing in expertise. They're bringing in mentorship. They come and help to do training. They connect us to people in the global north. So I think the diaspora has a very big role to play here. They understand our context, but they have maybe better opportunities to be able to act on the kinds of things that we need. So we are working very closely with the diaspora. So the question about the handling the government, is that the funding? I mean, so scientists tend to talk to scientists. And we've been trying for so long to actually get kind of a voice in the governments. In South Africa, we had the National Bioinformatics Network, and so we've been working with people in the Department of Science and Innovation to they understand, they recognize the importance of bioinformatics, even if they're not really yet putting money into it. But I think it's the access to governments to have that conversation. It's very difficult for a scientist just to like phone up the DSI, the African Union, and say, can we chat about something? Where do you get the audience, and where do you get the audience that's most appropriate? I was at the Africa CDC, a side meeting of the African Union Summit the other day, but they've got so many other priorities. You need to find the right person in government to talk to. The most interesting is that when the UK government put a huge amount of money into genomics for health, it was because David Cameron has a son who has a rare genetic disorder, or he has a disease that could be treated by genomics. So again, it's going down to somebody a champion where that matters to them. So this government interface is really difficult to navigate. What we're trying to do with the African Bioinformatics Institute right now, it's external funded. In parallel, we're working to make sure that actually in the future, it's actually an intergovernmental organization, not just a bunch of institutes that are connected. So it's a formal government organization, so that they take responsibility, they take accountability for the work that we're doing.
Oh, wonderful. And there are a few more comments here, but they are mostly along the lines. We have two fellows, one from Benin and a scientist from Kenya. They want to know about ABI, and I would preempt that by asking them to get back with us from the AAS, and we provided information for follow-ups after this call. And as for me, I want to ask a quick question here, Professor Mulder. There is the Global Bioinformatics Coalition that is working to address this same problem across different geographies around the world. This problem is not unique to Africa. It might be more pernicious in Africa, but the US, the ASEAN countries in Asia, Europe itself faces the same thing. So the disparities in data and the need to process them, harmonize them, and get good information out of the data is universal. Are you familiar with the Global Biodata Coalition and their work, and how does it interface with your own work?
Thanks. So I've just put up the QR code and the link to the website. So yeah, the Global Biodata Coalition are actually on the advisory board for that, and they're looking at sustainability for bioinformatics for data resources, biological data resources, which is the hardest thing to do. When I worked at the European Bioinformatics Institute, I was running one of these, and it's really difficult. So actually, we've been talking to them, and the African resources are not quite yet at a point where we are part of the Global Biodata Coalition, because they've just got a set of criteria that you can join with them. But because I'm on the advisory board, I'm connected and I'm following their activities. There are a number of other global bioinformatics initiatives. There's a global organization for bioinformatics learning, education, and training, the International Society for Computational Biology. So there are a number of these global networks, and they do definitely have the same challenges, not quite as acute as we have in low and middle income countries. But we're working with all the ones that we know of. We are definitely working with them, and we're sharing experiences. And they're actually also learning from Africa. So our experiences, because we overcome these challenges, we have novel solutions, and they're actually implementing those themselves. So it's a two-way kind of connection that we're having with these international networks.
Yeah. Okay, I just 1 more second, if you don't mind. I'm being told that we have 3 more hands up, and I cannot see them on the screen here. IT, can you help me with those 3 hands?
Yeah, I can maybe mention one. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. It's a wonderful discussion. I have a question to the African genome. Whenever I hear about African ancestry, it is mostly South Africa or few Western African countries. And yet, we always talk African ancestry. As you indicated, Africa is not one country, even if every country has differences in terms of frequency and everything. So are we creating disparities within Africa, given that most countries, I don't know even if they have a genomics program, leave alone the bioinformatics and high-tech throughput like you described. Just want to comment on that. How many people, how many institutions in Africa understand the role of genetics? And also, what about the disparities that's happening in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. So the first set of data coming out of genomic data coming out of different countries was actually generated by H3 Africa. And so those were funded research projects. So they were competitive proposals. And so the countries that won those, and they were distributed across the continent, they would obviously focus on the sites that they had. The disparities are because when you want to collect data for genomic sequencing, you need to have nurses on the ground, you need community engagement, you need ethics, you need a very big workforce. And of course, the more limited the capacity, the fewer of those components you're going to have. And so we tend to have a scarcity of data in areas where you don't have the capacity to actually start recruitment. So we've actually got a new project that's been funded by the Wellcome. Actually, ABI is part of this project, is to identify sites where there is no genomic data because of this, and actually develop those sites from scratch. So there's going to be an open call later this year for up to 5 different sites where there is no genomic data. So the genomic data that we have is very much linked to who had money to generate the data, who had money to have participants recruited. So it's very much... it's not scientifically driven. It's been driven by what exists on the continent and who's funded to do it. So we need to change that. And this new project is going to change that by going into those areas that have nothing and need to start from scratch.
Wonderful. And next would be Mr. Adrian Luti, if you will. Mr. Luti, would you mind unmuting yourself? You're muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for a great talk, Professor Mulder. You touched on the questions that I have briefly. It mainly to do with resources and sustainability. So you mentioned that for DSI you have funding from NIH, and for your ABI you currently have funding from the Wellcome, which is great. But you put up a map of Africa with your ambitious outlook of what things are going to look like. I just wonder what your time frame is for what you want to set up and how sustainable that's going to be looking forwards. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sustainability is always the hardest thing that's why we have Global Biodata Coalition, because nobody's solved the sustainability problem. So the research hubs, the research groups they should fund themselves. They should have institutional positions and they should get their own research funding. It's really those core services. So we've already actually received money from the Wellcome for this project to sequence more genomes. We've already received a grant to support the African Population Cohorts Consortium. So we're looking at grants with partnering with the groups that need support to actually generate funding proposals and get funding for specific projects that way. But as I said, the ultimate goal is to build this into an intergovernmental organization. So Elixir, which is a European research infrastructure for life sciences, is the European equivalent. They are actually, the member states actually put money in to their own bioinformatics and also to the central hub to keep it running. So we want to get to a model that's a bit more similar to that. That's going to take too much, it's going to take a lot of time, which is why we're kind of starting the other activities in parallel, because there was an urgent need to get that going. So we're looking at a multiple different ways of sustainability, the governmental organization for their input, multiple different funding, and potentially income through training or service provision.
Okay, that's great. But as you will be very well aware, in the current climate, there's a lot of competing demands on African government resources, and I'm really concerned that they're not going to put this sort of effort top of the list.
So that's why we're doing this in parallel. We're not like holding our breath for that to happen any time fast. But that's why we need to push. Well, what is that? What is the ultimate impact? Is there a health impact? And then you use the health budget or something. It's hard. It's very hard.
Okay. Thanks very much. Anyway.
If I may add very quickly, so this issue of data and data sovereignty and Africa's capabilities in data sciences is it's across all sectors. Telecommunications data, marketing data, and business data, all sorts of data. Our infrastructure, our computer science, our environment still has a long way to go. And we've been working here at the Academy to address just some of these kind of problems at the level of governments, in terms of working on the issue of science advice to governments, science advice to parliaments. We live in a science-led world, and those who don't invest appropriately in all the scientific tools just will be lagging behind. So this question is not unique to the bioinfo world. It's a broad continental problem on everything data. And so we'll be looking forward to working closely with you, Professor Mulder, to advance this overall issue of data infrastructures broadly across the continent. If I may, one last hand is up here. Mr. Benjamin Emigbe, please make it brief as you will. We're well past the hour.
Thank you so much. I think my question had been a little bit addressed, where I was looking at the application of bioinformatics in trafficking of endangered species in Africa, and looking at it from the aspect of wildlife and conservation. But one of the major things I saw while the presentation was going on is the fact that this is a methodology that is extremely expensive. And then I queried the issue of sustainability, knowing fully well that government of Africa are very poor in funding, and many of the research that is being done currently is donor funded. And don't you think one of the areas we really need to concentrate on is the buy-in and the issue of sustainability, to make sure that this laudable work is properly sustained within Africa, even as donor funding is getting scarce now and very competitive. Over.
Yeah. So again, this is the big sustainability question, and it comes down. I think there are a lot of things that can be addressed. That need to be addressed. So, for example, the data generation is expensive because genome sequencing is expensive. The cost is coming down, but it's more expensive in Africa because we have import duties. So, if we work with the Department of Trade and Industry to lower the tariffs, if we work with the private sector to not have the distributor taking their extra cut. So we can cut costs at many different levels in addition to this, long-term sustainability discussion. We need to prioritize research, and that's one of the aims of ABI, is to say, well, how do we reduce redundancy? If everybody needs the same kind of data infrastructure, why pay 5 different people to develop at 5 different times? Can we consolidate, use the skills to develop it across different sectors? So what we're trying to do is basically get more kind of economy. We did that in H300. We did so much with so little because we pooled our resources and we were resourceful in what we could do with very little money. So we need to tackle sustainability on multiple different fronts, cutting costs, reducing redundant work, and then getting money from the people who really should be responsible for this, which is our institutions and our governments. So we're going to tackle it on all different fronts, but it is a long-term problem to address.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Prof. Mulder. I think we'll call it up here. It's about 11 minutes after the hour. We're at 1 hour. What a fantastic lecture you've given us and exposed us to this problem, which is global, but the African aspect of it. And personally, I really admire your focus on African sovereignty, African ownership, African solutions to African problems as part of the global commons, but then for Africa to focus on its own, because our data, our reality, their uniqueness to our own African environment. So I very much appreciate what you've shared with us today. To our audience, we will follow up with you online with an email asking you for any more questions or comments you may have with Professor Mulder, and we'll forward it to her so that you can continue the discussions among yourselves. We will also put some of the information online on our website. We are institutionalizing this lecture series, this presidential lecture series. And we want to invite you to visit our website often. We'll be announcing the next lecture in the next week or so on a different topic. The Academy has 10 different disciplines. We want to also discuss things of economics and finance, mathematics and physics, agriculture and social sciences, policy, and the humanities. So we have all of those things under our umbrella, and we want to diversify the voices that you hear from our community. So we'll be scheduling one more lecture every month for at least 10 every year for our 10 clusters. Look out for our website, look out for communication from us. We thank you for having made the time to spend this 1 hour with us. We thank someone like Professor Beye out of the US. I know it's very early for you, but you are here with us. That's the reach we want to reach from the Academy. And with that, I would defer now to our president, who has made sure that under her tenure, this lecture series is revived and made institutional. I will invite her now to make the final comments, and we close for the day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kim. And thank you also for pushing this presidential talks. We are very excited to know that we have a whole series of talks, and I am sure we will be supported by the fellows. And I also then want to say to Professor Mulder, thank you very much for talking to us about this very important matter, open science. This is only the beginning, and we are looking forward working closely with ABI. We are already, and we are taking this to another level. And just thank you very much to all our fellows who supported us. And we are looking forward to the next presidential talk. So thank you, Professor Kim.
Thank you. And with that, we'll call it a day. Have a very good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.